Oh, hello everyone. This is our last session where I will be doing a kind of presentation for the tutorial on projects. We'll be focusing on conclusions and recommendations. The last chapter, if you don't include your reflections bit that you need to add to the project dissertation report. But what I would like to do at the end of this session is, as usual, if I'll stop the recording, and if there are any questions about your particular project or any challenges that you're facing, we'll be happy to do the text questions and hopefully address them. So, without any other delay, we're looking at GSM projects, conclusions, and recommendations. As you can see here, we want to start off, of course, with our research objectives, tie that into the literature review, look at our primary research findings, so any type of survey or questionnaire interview and anything like that you're doing. Talk about triangulating the data. Very important to connect all of the bits of information that you're getting in your report and hooking it up together, so that will then feed into your conclusions. And then from the conclusions, have informed recommendations. And then based on that, hopefully you're going to be reflecting and making any predictions for future projects or future research. It looks like we got Katie in. Welcome. Glad to see you here. Please do text any questions in the text chat while we're going through if you have a question. Or you can save it, towards the end. That's fine. So the first stage of our report, and pretty much any research and development project that you might be doing, whether it's academic or commercial, is to state what the objectives are. Now, this is an important element because every step of the way that you're doing your project, you should be cross-checking back against those objectives. So, for example, here I've listed this project will find out how to do number 1, how to do number 2, and how to do number 3. If you're doing some reading and your reading is about how to do number 4, then that's not going to help answer the questions that you have for your measurable objectives. And so you have to prioritize and say, well, that might be interesting, but is it something which is going to add value to my report and my project at this time? Might be something for future reference, but force yourself to discipline yourself to check your objectives as you're going along. So the next stage then is the literature review, or sometimes we're doing it as more of a market research, where we're looking at the competition to see what other companies, what other organizations are doing. And in this case, we might say that what we're going to do is a literature review which made a critical analysis of several sources. So in our case with the dissertation, it might be that you're doing something from an academic source like books or websites. But we also want to try to include the online news, like current events as well. The more current the information that you're using is the more relevant it would be to your manager or the director of the company that you're putting the report together for. And then, as you're going through this data and you are starting to group things by themes, you'll come to different conclusions where you're saying, okay, well, theme A is some information that I've gotten from the books and, say, the websites. Theme B is something that I've gotten from websites and news articles. And theme C is something which I've gotten just, say, from the news articles. So those would be like the three section or chapter conclusions. So it's really important at the end of each of these chapters or sections to have some type of summary tying those different themes together. So you probably will actually want to have a subheading that's called summary. And that will just help you to link what you're doing in the literature review to your research objectives, and then later on in the report as well. So now we get into the primary research findings. So and it depends, which technique you're using. If you're doing observations, if you are doing a survey or a questionnaire, maybe an interview or a focus group. There are a number of different ways that you're going to be collecting that primary data. It might be from one individual or a group of employees or hundreds of customers. So as you're getting the findings from the data that you've collected, you're going to then start to put, again, your findings together into themes. So hopefully when you organized your survey, you were to look at your questions and you were to say, okay, question number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the survey addresses learning objective 1. Question 5, 6, 7, 8 is objective 2, and question 9 and 10 objective 3. And in that way, you are able to link the data from your primary research in order to be able to clearly map the path of your evidence. So if you have a finding which does not have anything to do with your research question and objectives, then you may want to put that off to the side. That may be some kind of unexpected result, but make sure that you map your data directly to your research questions. So this is what we're talking about when we say triangulation. We want to then cross-compare the data so that you have a way of verifying your findings, and the relationship is shown to be very robust. You've got conclusions which aren't just your opinion, but rather conclusions which are reached based on your findings, your evidence, and your data. One way of looking at this is what we call synthesis. This is where you might have two bits of information that you originally had as separate bits of data, but when you combine that data together, you form a new bit of information. So, imagine in a cooking metaphor, you've got some spices that you usually use for one recipe, and some spices that you usually use in another recipe. And your synthesis, your mix together of the two spices to make a brand new recipe is one way taking your data triangulation and creating new information or new knowledge based on your research. So when we look here, we can see that the conclusions will actually thread all of the bits from the chapters together. So you should have a summary from your literature review. You should have a summary section in your findings. And then you take those bits of summary, you bring them together in your conclusions, and then you tie that in together with your research objectives. So based on your triangulation, you can now support your conclusions with evidence. And you want to be careful here, because this is not the place to insert brand new information. Sometimes I'll read reports and a whole new area of discussion, a whole new topic is mentioned in the conclusion. When I do a search for that term in the report, I can't find it anywhere else in the report. So that nullifies, that invalidates, that cancels out that information. It's not added value to the report because you can't introduce new information in the conclusion. It needs to be threaded in with the body text of this story. So as you are getting ready for recommendations, what you're doing then is you're taking those main themes from the conclusions that's built off of the summaries of the other chapters, and then you're able to then map this out. So the recommendations are informed by the suggestions leading to actions. So if you're recommending something, it's to do something. It's based on evidence. It should not be based on your opinion, your beliefs, or feelings, unless, of course, you're doing some type of social science on ethics, morality, religion, something like that. For our business research, we are looking for data, evidence, and information which can support your claims. So below here you see a table showing a kind of like pathway from the project objectives all the way to the recommendations. And including a table like this in your conclusions or in your recommendations helps the reader, because at a glance they are able to see that you started with objective number 1. The literature review said A and B. Your research findings also supported A. And so your conclusion here is A. Well, what do you recommend about that particular topic of A? Well, you're suggesting that the recommendation is that the action of 1A should be put in place. And so on. With the second objective, again, B and C from the literature review, B for the findings, B is your conclusion, and you're making a recommendation of doing 2B, and so on into the third one. Of course, you can have more objectives than that, but generally speaking, you don't want to have too many, because each one must be measured and each one should have supporting data. So you finish that off, and for the project dissertations, there is a section for reflection that you need to add. Read the requirements, the criteria on that. It's not very long. I think it's like 1 page, 500 words, something like that. But it is allocated a percentage. I think it's 10% of your grade. So if you do not put that section in, then you lose marks. But that's a part where you might be looking at it and you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to make some predictions now. What's the next generation of this project going to look like, or if I were continuing to do this project into the next stage, all right, what lessons learned did you have? What would you do differently? Did you find some challenges that made your project difficult and that you would not do again in the same way? It's also where you're trying to predict trends. So you're looking at those patterns from your analysis and seeing if you could predict where that topic is going to be going in the next stage. When you do your critical review of what went wrong in the project, how would you fix it next time? All right, so that's an important part of reflection, the reflective process. Okay, I hope that's useful. If I'm going to stop the recording here.